Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living, a podcast to bring the ancient wisdom of yoga to inform your everyday living on and off the mat. Hi, I am your host, Monica Phillips. So often we sabotage ourselves because of the chatter in our heads. This podcast will take you through the 8 limbs of yoga with leading yoga instructors and introduce you to executives who have brought yoga into their lives so they can thrive. Please listen, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Hello and welcome. I'm here with the amazing Dianne Bondy, social justice activist, author, accessible yoga teacher, and the leader of the Yoga for All movement. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Monica. It's an honor to be here.
You led a workshop for the Yoga Works teacher training, which I got to be part of, and it was so beautiful. And I wanted to bring your words to more people. We're going to talk about the Yamas today, in particular Ahimsa, which we'll get into. But I want to share a little bit more about you because you have such a beautiful background and experience. You have an inclusive approach to yoga to empower anyone to practice, which is so important to me. I teach beginners and I've had the privilege and honor of teaching people their very first yoga class ever. I get to hold them and bring them into the mat. And I think of you when I teach them, I think like yoga is for everyone. And yoga is a gift that I get to share for those who are willing to come and practice. You have this really great inclusive approach of regardless of shape, size, ethnicity, level of ability. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about yoga. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you're revolutionizing yoga by educating yoga instructors around the world on how to make their classes welcoming for all kinds of practitioners. We were talking a little bit about how in this post-COVID time, you've really helped a lot of yoga teachers move online because you've been doing it since 2012. And so even just allowing that accessibility, right? Accessibility looks different now. Maybe not a wheelchair ramp, it's bandwidth, how we get to participate. Yeah. Your commitment to increasing diversity in yoga has been recognized in Pennington's, GAIAM, and the Yoga and Body Image Coalition. You also speak and have done a lot of speaking engagements, Princeton, Duke, University of Buffalo, and UC Berkeley on yoga, race, and diversity. And your writing has been published in Yoga and Body Image, Volume 1, Yoga Renegades, and Yes, Yoga Has Curves. You have an awesome book. You have 2 books.
I do.
For more than 20 years, you've been leading Yoga Revolution, empowering students to come to the mat as they are. And so we're going to talk about the inclusivity and leading systemic change within the yoga industrial complex. It sounds so exciting. A really good starting point. People who want to know more will have to find you at diannebondyyoga.com. Yeah. And it'll be in all of the show notes. I want to talk about the Yamas with you. And the Yamas are these ethical guidelines, self-regulating behaviors. And we also say restraints. There are 5 of them. So in the 8 limbs of yoga, the Yamas come first. And it's how do we live to the outside world? You can tell me more, your version of that. And then it's Ahimsa, nonviolence, Satya, truthfulness, Asteya, non-stealing, Brahmacharya, moderation, and aparigraha, non-hoarding.
That's the tricky one.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
That one's the tricky one. Yeah.
So tell me about your work, how you see the Yamas in your life.
Well, what I really liked about looking at yoga as a system to actually change the world by first reflecting on myself and how I show up in the world and what I want to share with the world. So for a long time, and I think we touched on this even just briefly, we've had this misconception that yoga is a series of poses that we do on a mat in athletic gear that's often highly sexualized or revealing or whatever. Like I've never seen a pair of yoga pants, or I don't very often, I shouldn't say never, I don't very often see a pair of yoga pants that aren't always sold to me as a second skin and butt sculpting and all these things. These are the things that we need when we're in a practice of getting to know ourselves and how we want to show up in the world. Those are the first 2 limbs of yoga, the Yamas and Niyamas, spoke really, really deeply to my heart because it really spoke to why I was on the mat. I'm not on the mat to change my body. I'm on the mat to change my mind and to create an understanding, a larger understanding of the world, my impact on the world, and how I can leave this place, this world, this community, the people around me, a better place than when I entered into it. That I have a legacy of moving the world forward. And so the very first Yama, Ahimsa, nonviolence, spoke to me. And the first time it actually clicked with me was in my first 200-hour teacher training, when my teacher, Linda Makowski, said, when you look at yourself in the mirror and you start picking yourself apart, that's Ahimsa. So Ahimsa has to start at home first, because if you are comfortable with picking yourself apart, putting yourself down, being highly critical, whether it's of your intelligence, your looks, or of your body, it gives you permission to be that way with other people. So that when we see other people in media, we're quick to criticize what they look like or how they're behaving, because we do that for ourselves. So it becomes a projection of even our own self-loathing onto the world. And when she said that, that's when that kind of clicked for me. How much of our discrimination, our behaviors that cause violence and harm to other people are based in our own self-hate? And I have some theories and some feelings around, or some thoughts around, that's how come we have these divisions around race and gender and sexuality. There's something that's deeply embedded in ourselves that we are unhappy with, or that we don't understand, that makes us fearful of people who are different from us. And that kind of perpetuates this idea of us versus them, and the othering of people, and the understanding that in order for me to feel fulfilled, or for me to be at the top of the heap, I have to have more and some people have to have less. And that learning that is rooted in our own violence toward ourselves. That was my deep dive in my second day of teacher training, when the first day was like, get to know each other and we're going to practice together and let's talk about our path. And then the second day was, okay, down to business. Let's start unpacking those 8 limbs. And then when she hit on Ahimsa as the first limb, I was like, I have never thought that the violence that I do to myself perpetuates the violence that happens in the world. I had never put those two things together before my yoga practice. When I started my yoga practice, I was 3 years old. My mother started it because she had 3 children under the age of 4 and needed something that she could do in her house that wasn't going to require her to leave, because she didn't drive and she was a new immigrant to the country. So she was very limited in the resources she had around her. And so for a long time, I thought that's what the yoga practice was. And it wasn't until I got older and I started digging into the philosophy, I thought, I can use this practice to change the world. I can use this practice to bring awareness to the vast inequities that happen around marginalized communities that happen here on the mat in a practice that's supposed to be about unity. So all of these things weren't lining up and making sense to me. So I had to figure out, how do I apply my understanding of yoga, my understanding of yoga philosophy, in changing the perspective on the mat, having more people look like me practicing and teaching and being regarded as yoga experts. Because when I was coming up and I was being trained, there were no people of color who were training yoga teachers, certainly not people of size. And if there were people from the LGBTQIA plus community teaching, upon first look at them, there's no way to tell that they're part of that community unless they're with their partner, or they say a lot of the time, there's no way to determine. So I wasn't seeing people who were other than thin, white, young, flexible, able-bodied people on the mat teaching me contortionism. I wasn't seeing that link to, how do I take the lessons from the Gita, or how do I take the lessons from the Yamas and the Yamas of the 8 limbs and then move out into the world and make a huge change, or help other people see that the way we change the world is through ourselves first, is understanding what our impact is. How do I do that? How do I make it make sense outside of these acrobatic things I was doing on the mat?
I lead workshops on empathy, and I recently read some research that this will not surprise you in regard to certain people in the world, that with more power and more assumed status, we lose empathy.
It's true. And I've seen it. I think if we look at the political landscape over time, it doesn't matter what country you're from, when you see people ascend to the highest office, you see them lose touch with humanity a little bit. And I've seen it with people who've ascended from being a practitioner and going to yoga a few times a week, then becoming a yoga teacher, and then gaining a little bit of yoga notoriety, whether it's in social media circles or in the industrial yoga complex, and maybe have been elevated to expert. And those people that you knew before who are now experts, you see that transition away from their empathy, or you see that they become a little bit self-entitled or self-righteous. And I've certainly seen that. And I've always wanted to make sure that my teaching of yoga was about everybody and not about me. And it's easy when you have people around you telling you all the time how much your work has impacted them or how much you've changed their life or whatever, to get caught up in your own stuff and think you're great and begin to disconnect from whatever their struggle is, or not seeing them as anything other than, let's say, a fan. Whereas any work that people have done in a course that I've led or in a conversation I've had is work that they've done. I might have just, the same way Linda turned that light bulb on for me, and I was, this is what the practice is for me. That's all I did for you. I happened to be there when you were having a moment. You did all the work. I take no credit for it. Like, it's the yoga that's doing the work. I just happened to be the one that caught your attention in the moment. When I teach I'm done teaching 200-hour trainings, but when I used to teach 200-hour trainings, I would say to my teachers all the time, don't get caught up in your own hype. So people are going to come to you even when you've taught the worst class, or you perceive the worst class of your life, and say how it had been life affirming or changing for them. Know that they were in a space to receive that information from the yoga that you taught. It has actually nothing to do with you. Just so you're clear, just so that we don't get caught up and lose our connection to each other, which to me is losing that connection of empathy. That study doesn't surprise me at all. We see it all the time with politicians and rock stars. People start to use each other. And I think that speaks to aparigraha, right? Where people start to think everything is theirs to have and to hoard and to keep, where it's not. The more you have, the more you should be sharing.
Cool to hear your story, because I think that when I started practicing on the mat in my 20s, like you, I had a mom who practiced yoga, so I've always known about it. I didn't always engage with it, but then I actually took my first studio class in France. It was in Minneapolis for 5 years and then DC for 10. I used to think that it was like, oh, people who were athletic and gymnastics would do yoga because they could. They had the range of flexibility. I have seen an overarching shift. I don't know if it's just because I'm finally aware of it too. And so I notice all the people who are bringing this mindfulness into yoga, at least in the last 11 years for me, I've noticed a deep change in who shows up to yoga classes, taking away the need to be in the body and really coming to the mind. And so I think of Ahimsa and I think of your work in social justice. How does someone start to tap into this when they see yoga as, oh, I'm not bendy, right? How do you come to that?
It's really changed now. So when I started doing yoga publicly, I remember when I opened my studio, I opened a studio, I want to say in 2006, like an actual studio. I had been teaching all this time, but then I had a brick and mortar business in 2006. A lot of the yoga imagery out there was very much white, very much able-bodied, cisgender, heteronormative, check all the boxes, featuring young people primarily, all the things. When you look at that constant imagery, you're like, well, clearly yoga's not for me. Like you said, athletic people and flexible people, dancers, gymnasts, seem to be attracted to this practice because they can do it, I think, with not a whole lot of effort. And it mimics a lot of the activities they've already done. So it feels like familiar and comfortable and all these things. And then you don't see a lot of that. And I wasn't seeing a lot of that. And I wasn't even in my own yoga studio space putting pictures of myself up, because I thought that I was somehow bastardizing the practice because I was a plus size person. And quite frankly, because I was a person of color, because I wasn't seeing other people of color in positions of power within teaching communities, teaching and sharing. And so for a long time, I was in my own confusion around that. And the minute I put my picture up on the website and I changed my website, I started to see different people filtering into the studio and people identifying with my body type and my hair texture and my skin shade as people who were like, oh, yes, I'm a person of color. Oh, yes, there's a place for me in that. And then I met my friend Melanie Klein on Twitter, of all places. I wrote an article in 2011 or 12, I can't remember, for Elephant Journal called Yoga Isn't Just for Skinny White Girls. And that's how we met, because that's all I was seeing and everything. And I remember going to a yoga class and having somebody look me over and go, do you do yoga? And then that was the end. My head blew off. There has to be other people out there that look like me who do yoga. This cannot be only this thing. And so I started speaking out about it. And the minute I started speaking out about it, I found my friend Melanie Klein, and together a group of us put together the Yoga and Body Image Coalition, and we started churning out forward-facing imagery that was contrary to what we were constantly seeing, in hopes that people would see that imagery and go, wait a minute, this is for me as well. So in the beginning, it was incredibly hard. I think now, because we have seen a shift around accepting the bodies we're in and a pushback against this constant narrative that our bodies are a project that we need to be always fixing and apologizing for and all that, that people have kind of risen up. I think when we started this conversation, we were a little before our time, because we used to get a lot of pushback against promoting equity and diversity in yoga. Go figure. But now it's come full circle. I remember back in 2010, I started sending out packages to yoga studios going, I'd like to come and teach about yoga and diversity and inclusivity and equity. And I sent out, I think, somewhere around 50 to 75 emails and promotional packages saying, I'd love to come to your studio and teach. And one studio got back to me and said, everybody else was like, that sounds really good, but that's not really what we're into here. One studio got back to me, and that studio was in Ottawa, and I went there and taught that workshop. And it was funny because nobody was interested. And so then I thought to myself, okay, that's fine. I'm just going to do our teacher trainings around that in my own studio space. So that if people in my community want to learn about that, that's great. But the larger world isn't really interested and ready. And then all of a sudden they were. And it's only, I would say, been in the past 4 years that people have actually opened their eyes and looked around a yoga class and went, where are the fat people? And I mean that in the most loving and respectful way. I refer to myself as fat. Where are the plus size people? Where are the people of color? Where are the people with disabilities? Where are the older people? That's been recent. And that should have been from the beginning, because yoga is the practice of consciousness. And if you are unconscious to your surroundings, then you're creating harm.
Thank you for saying that. Something I deeply appreciate about Yoga Works is that I see all bodies in the
Nice.
classes. I don't know what they did by design to allow that, but imagine if you hadn't done your work. I used to not like this phrase we say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. I don't believe that. But then ultimately, as I unwrap that phrase, I think people do want to see. And when you share your story, you give someone else permission to share their story. And then they feel safe sharing their story. And then they feel safe being a plus size Black woman in a yoga class.
And empowering to see the teacher that looks like you and think, I can do this too. Because I had momentarily had a pause around that thing as well. If you can't see it, you can't be it. But I do think it's truthful. And I think of it now as the administration is shifting, that we're going to see a Black woman in the second highest position in power in the entire world. So for all the Black women in the world who thought they could never ascend to that place, we now have an example. For white folks, there's always been an example of excellence in everything. So people can always ascend to that. For Black folks, there's only been limited examples of excellence, and often they focus around our physicality. Professional athletes have always been held to this high standard. And it's interesting that people can be of a super bigoted mindset and still like their favorite basketball player or whoever it may be. And that has been largely where people of color have been funneled. I've heard Neil, I'm screwing up his name. Everybody knows who I'm talking about. When he was studying physics in university, people were constantly trying to pigeonhole him because he's over 6 feet tall. You should be playing basketball. You shouldn't be studying physics. Because the only example of Black excellence that you saw at that point, I believe he's in his 50s or 60s, were people who had athletic prowess. That was the way, or musical prowess. That was the way that we ascended. We weren't looking at people of color who weren't elevated to the public eye who had incredible intellect. It wasn't until I saw the movie Hidden Figures that I even knew that Black mathematicians helped get the first man on the moon, that GPS was created by a Black person. These things that we use in modern times were created by people who look like me. And had I seen that, how different would my world be? Had I had an example of Black women in power, Michelle Obama or Oprah when I was growing up, what would my perception of myself be? How much different would my world be? How much greater of an opportunity could I have created for myself if I knew that that was possible? Seeing that it's possible is extraordinary.
You wanted to launch this workshop, you went somewhere else. They weren't ready for you yet, right? There's this safety in being in a community that sees you. And so then you go back to the least common denominator. Where can I go where I feel safe? What can we share with people who are listening to this about the Yamas to help them notice something in themselves and take action to bring more of the Yamas into the world?
Especially the first one, Ahimsa. This one I think aligns great with a niyama, which is self-study. Looking at how we talk to ourselves, how we look at ourselves, how we interact with the people around us. Because the first stop, that's why I think Ahimsa is so important for the first, because it really asks us to look at how we show up and how we create situations that are unsafe, not only for ourselves, for the people around us. And until we've sat with that, I feel we can't dive any further. There's a reason that the yoga practice starts here. What violence am I creating towards myself, towards the environment, towards the world, towards people who look different from me, who think differently from me, who have different lived experiences from me? How can I move from a place of violence and where I don't want to be around them, I don't care, they're asking for too much, there's stereotypes I believe about these people too. I need to put down my walls and get to know somebody that I am afraid of, or get to know somebody who's different from me, then to learn that we're not so different at all, that we want to be loved and we want to be seen and we want to be accepted and we want to raise great children that go out into the world and do great things. The minute I sit down with somebody who is different from me in those aspects, and I learn that we have a same common goal or denominator, then I can see that person as myself. Then I can see that person as myself, and then I can go out into the world and make change. But the first thing we have to do is know who we are and know what our impact is. Having said that, there are people out in the world who have no interest in getting to know who you are, who are going to meet you with violence. And we saw it with insurrection. We saw it with the insurrection on Capitol Hill. There was a group of people out there who truly think that they are entitled to everything and that you need to sit down and be quiet. And when you are coming to meet them face to face, they're going to meet you with violence and death. These are people that you have to set aside. These are people that you are not going to agree with. These are people that don't have empathy. And it's not up to you to change those people. It's up to you to connect with people who can help lift up the world instead of dragging the world down. So I really have to make that distinction. I am kind of over this yogic idea that I have to love everyone, especially if somebody is trying to kill me in the process over the color of my skin. It doesn't work that way. It will never work that way until those people have sat with themselves and decide why it is they hate people that look different for them and have their own, as I say, come to Jesus moment. That I have to be discerning about and step away from, because it may cause violence to me and harm, because they haven't looked at their impact on the world. They're only looking at what they can gain from their actions. So that is separate from the rest of us. So we have to be careful in the yoga community with this we are all one kind of spiritual bypassing that we do. We all come from the same source. That I believe. I believe in supreme consciousness. I believe we all come from the same source. But we have very different lived experiences and very different, how you show up in the world is very different from how I show up in the world. What you will gain from the world will be very different from what I gain from the world. Doesn't mean that we can't come together and know each other and do better, but we have to understand that people have their differences, and that's okay. Differences aren't incurring harm on someone else.
Yes. And I love that you connected it to self-study. There's this book, Chatter by Ethan Kross, and he references that people, we're able to think of as many negative thoughts, all the negative self-talk in our heads in 90 seconds as what would be spoken in a 6,000 word, 1 hour State of the Union address. We put all of that into 90 seconds of negativity in our brains. And I think of this essence, yoga, chitta, vritta, narodi, getting out of the chatter in our heads, stopping that. And there are so many people, like you said in the very beginning, there are so many people who are hurting and they cannot meet us where we are. It's not up to us to go forward and get killed in order to combat that. I find it's actually combat. They are not ready. The workshop you did, you mentioned that you don't say namaste because namaste means the light in me sees, honors, and values the light in you. And you don't know who is in the room and if they really see and honor you. Can you tell me more about that in sense of ahimsa?
I've had this conversation with other people of color, in particular, a really good friend of mine, Rebecca Price of I Rise Yoga. And we've had this conversation in depth, and she illuminated this for me. I know that Susan Barataki talks about cultural appropriation around the word namaste, and she has a really good, interesting lecture on her website and on her social media around that. For me, exactly that. I don't know who's in the room. I don't know who's had their self-study and sat with their discomfort and is actually seeing me as an equitable human being. So for me, saying the light in me sees the light in you when you may not see the light in me doesn't feel authentic and safe. I would rather thank you for sharing your practice with me or wish you peace in the world than to say the light in me sees the light in you when I'm not sure that that's true at all, that we're not mirroring that same energy. It doesn't feel authentic to me anymore. I said it before and I used to love to say it because I really meant it when I knew who was in the room, when I knew who my students were, when I knew where people's hearts were. I don't know if it was in your particular cohort, but in a cohort that I had taught, there were a couple of people in the room who felt as Republican women, they were the most discriminated group in society. Republican white women was their feeling, was the most discriminated group in society.
There was an
Really?
expression of that in my cohort. It's
What?
hard.
Don't
It's
see the
hard to
whole
see.
world then. You're going to tell me that your experience walking through life is the same as a person who identifies as LGBTQIA. You feel equally as affected as they do, as affected as I do. That there tells me that the light in you and the light in me are different. And you don't see the light in me if you think as a white Republican woman that you are the most discriminated group in the world. Are you serious? I had an opportunity to take an advanced teacher training with an incredible teacher named Matthew Sanford, who is an Iyengar teacher who happens to be a paraplegic. And so we learned how to do yoga with people who had quadriplegia and paraplegia. And that workshop forever changed me because I had no understanding of what it was like to leave your house and get to wherever you need to go. Because I just get up, put on my coat, my shoes, get in my car and drive. It doesn't occur to me that if you are a person in a wheelchair, it may take you all day because you may need help getting there. You may need help getting dressed. You may need somebody to come and pick you up and take you there. You may need somebody to do things that I take for granted every day. And then I came home, I live in Canada, and I was watching a person with paraplegia talking about how navigating the transit system in Toronto was a nightmare because he was in a wheelchair. So they took an able-bodied person and they took him and they started off at the same starting point and had to make it to a destination. And they saw how much time it took the able-bodied person to get to the destination versus the person with the disability. And it took the person with the disability twice as long, if not 4 times as long, to get to these different locations. And it blew my mind how much I take for granted, how easy it is for me to navigate through the world. That is discrimination. When that is inequity, when a person who has a disability can't get to the same destination as a person with an ability within a reasonable amount of time.
And I think about that design thinking, building and creating. To whom are we giving access and who is limited by our decisions in creating this system this way?
Exactly. And that's why representation is so important as ahimsa. Representation is nonviolence or the perpetuation of empathy and understanding. You are creating a structure and there's going to be a hierarchy in the structure. At the top of the pyramid, everybody needs to be represented because if those are the people making the decisions and they are unaffected or unattached or unaware of what it's like for a person with a disability to move through the world, a person who is a person of color to move through the world. If you are not making decisions with all that in mind, then you're creating violence. And that's why representation is so important because you just need one person from a marginalized group going to say, hey, how is this person going to get access to these things? It was really interesting at the beginning of the ugh, administration, I can fill in the blank of that, when they were writing executive orders on women's issues and everybody in the room was a white dude. I was, excuse me, you're going to make decisions for me as a Black woman, decisions for you as a white woman, decisions for women with disabilities. Like, honest to God, you get to decide, with no understanding and no connection to that, no awareness of that whatsoever, or limited awareness of that because you might have a cousin or a wife or a sister who has that, but your understanding is much more limited than a person who's actually living in that body. And that, to me, beyond anything I could comprehend. And that, for me, was why it's so important to have representation, because representation is intrinsically linked to nonviolence, because representation means we are going to have more opportunities to give more people what they need because we see them and we feel them and we can relate to them.
It's inspiring to see all the changes in society in the last couple of years because women are getting on boards, minorities are represented at all levels. I mean, I live in Silicon Valley, so I live in this area where a lot of this happens more often. I live in a very liberal area, and I live in an area where people believe that, for the most part, that we have our fair share of haters, but for people to believe that everyone has a right to certain equitable right, healthcare and housing. And so there's this what's possible. I think of the expression, first they came for the Jews and I didn't do anything. And then they came for me. And I feel in what you're saying, who is making the decisions for whom? And what are the biases they bring into the room? And it's so harmful.
And that's the violence. What is the bias and the stereotype you bring into the room? And then you make your decisions based on that very narrow perspective that you have. That is violence to everybody who's going to be affected by your decision. When I was watching the administration trying to roll back healthcare, 50 million Americans, I was like, why? Why do you want to cause harm to people who just want healthcare? Why do you want to start to deconstruct education? Because I truly believe the constant defunding of education that's been going on for decades is how you got here. It's how you got 70 million Americans to think that the living nightmare the rest of us were living, and when I say us, I mean Americans because I'm a Canadian, were living, the rest of the world was watching in horror, was good for everybody. It's a lack of education. Again, it's why poor people will vote Republican. If you just look at the United States, the poorest states with the least opportunities are run by Republicans. What state do you want to model your country after? Kentucky? Isn't that Mitch McConnell? And it's a lack of education and a lack of awareness that we know that democratic states do better in housing and equity and all those things, yet people will vote against their own best interests because of stupidity. And I believe, I tell this to my husband 6-7 times a week, it's the defunding of education that is going to be the end of the world.
It's funny that the Yamas come first, because everything we're talking about here makes me think the Niyamas should come first. And in my coaching, even, I look at, in order to bring empathy into a team, first we need to look at ourselves. We need to look at the negative chatter. We need to recognize our saboteurs, and we need to embrace what's possible within ourselves so that we can give that to others. Why do the Yamas come first?
That's a whole dissertation, I think. For me, I think self-awareness and self-study is at top of the heap, but we can't do it, I think, without understanding the violence we cause against ourselves and others. It's an interesting way.
And the Yamas and Niyamas have often been compared to the 10 Commandments. And it's the sense of how we live in the world. The general population knows it's wrong to kill someone, but then go down a layer. It's wrong to cause harm through various violent actions, even if it's not murder. It's wrong to take something from someone that causes them harm. Ahimsa really kind of is all encompassing of all the yamas. That's harm, and it's also stealing. You keep breaking it down, but then how do I see myself in the world? How would I want to be treated? How would this feel if it were me? And then now what's the self-study I need to do to get there?
100%. The big thing that you said, that a big light bulb for me, was how would I feel if that were me? Could we start saying that on a regular basis? When we're seeing violent acts, when we're seeing Black children murdered by police, when we're seeing people protesting against Black people, saying Black Lives Matter, saying my life matters somehow infringes on your life. It doesn't. I'm just saying my life matters too, okay, to the same extent. And America wouldn't have been America without the hard labor and suffering of African Americans. You have to ask yourself how a new colony in the world, went to being a superpower in the world in less than 100 years. Cotton is how that happened. They had something that everybody needed and they could produce it with free labor. So all the wealth and institutions that you see in America have been given to you on the back of Indigenous people and on the back of Black people. And why Black folks are hated worldwide is beyond me. I will never understand what we did as a people to incur that kind of hatred and violence. I was watching excerpts from Phil Donahue. I'm aging myself here now. He was like the first talk show person that I remember. It was Merv Griffin, my mom used to watch, Michael Douglas, and then Donahue had that first daytime kind of talk show. I was listening to an excerpt about a person who was Farrakhan speaking, and now Farrakhan's got their own, the Nation of Islam has its own set of issues and things, but that's a whole nother podcast to talk about. When he was talking about the plight of Black people in America, this one woman was scared of equality for people of color because she was afraid of the violence that is associated with that. And then I look at the world, and in America in particular, and who perpetuates the most violence? Not Black folks. The number one terrorist organization in America is white supremacists. They have outshot, outgunned, outbombed jihadists by a long shot.
The most violent terrorist attack on the U.S., Oklahoma City bombing.
Which is why you can no longer bring firearms into federal buildings. That law started in 1995 based on that attack that was perpetrated by two white men. So when white folks talk about violence, they're afraid of the violence of Black folks, or that we're kind of sitting here waiting to enact some kind of revenge for 401 years plus of oppression. Not happening. We're not about that. I've been to all the meetings. I'm just kidding. We're not about that. We just want equity. We just want to not be shot the same way nobody bothered to shoot the insurrectionists that had a noose for Mike Pence and were talking about killing Nancy Pelosi. No shots were fired. If anything, Capitol Police were opening their doors and letting people in. And then in the summer, we had the full National Guard on display when peaceful protesters were saying, please stop shooting us in the street.
How do you bring Ahimsa into the students that you teach on the mat?
I start with Ahimsa starts at home, which is where I learned it first. It starts within your own body. I have a small studio space in my house. And prior to COVID, I had a group of women, older women, that I would primarily practice. I didn't teach public classes. I had this one group. And the oldest woman in my group was 85. And I think the youngest in my group was 72. And two of them were very strong. Like the 85-year-old was, I want to do handstand by the time I'm 90. Handstand's kind of performative, and I don't really think you need to do it. And I'm not comfortable with you doing handstand. Do L at the wall. I'm comfortable with that. And she would be up an L at the wall for literally 5 minutes. She was the strongest out of the group. That group was really great in showing me my stereotypes around aging. And then the other two people in the group couldn't do a whole lot. So they did a lot of things on the chair, a lot of things with the wall. And I just remember they were of a generation that was constantly criticizing their bodies on the mat. Sit on the mat and be like, oh, my thighs are so flabby. They used to not be this flabby. And skin is so crepey when I do this pose. And I would constantly have to say to them, this is a vessel for our soul, and it is an extension of the divine. So we want to remember to treat it as such. You only see your thighs as flabby because society has told you flabby thighs aren't good. So who benefits from you tearing yourself down? Not you. They're going to try to sell you some kind of cosmetic surgery or some kind of bullshit cream to rub on your thighs to make them, I don't know, less cellulite, but you have to be grateful that your thighs are showing up for you and working for you. They carry you around the world. My hashtag on Instagram is thick thighs save lives, thick thighs ride bikes. Making peace with the vessel that you're in, especially at this age. You have been living in a world that has been telling you that you are less than your entire life. Don't buy in.
And imagine if girls learned that at 14. And imagine the layers of Ahimsa that they could create within themselves and share with the world, because they have stripped away this irrelevance of all these things that cost money, that contribute to unfair labor, the plastic in the world, all of that.
Exactly. If we could see it for what it is. And I constantly tell people in my practice around Ahimsa, who benefits from your self-hatred? Not you. There's somebody out there making money off your self-loathing. So isn't it a radical act not to pay those people?
It's phenomenal. And I just think of what we can do right now to live in our bodies and to be strong in our bodies. And when we see ourselves and our imperfections and accept it, we get to see the imperfections in everyone else and we get to accept it. I have never met a perfect human being ever in my life.
There's no such thing. Perfection doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in nature. It only exists in our own imagination. It only exists in the marketing mind of the world. Perfection is not a thing. I remember having a conversation with a young group of women around back in the day when, remember 17 magazine was a thing and you turned 12.
Oh my gosh. And I look through and think, which outfit do I want to buy? And how can I come up with $400 for that I have to have when I'm 17? I mean, I was probably 14.
The magazine seemed irrelevant at that point, didn't it? But I just remember all those images in 17 magazine in the 80s when I was a girl in those gunny sack commercials, had to have this gunny sack dress and all of that. And all of that self-loathing. And there'd always be articles in it, how to dress for your figure flaws. I'm going to let everybody know there are no figure flaws. That is not a thing. That is a marketing concept to get you to either buy into plastic surgery or buy some kind of restrictive clothing to make you look smaller or to sell you some kind of diet. Everybody has a different body shape. If we all look the same or all were designed to eat the same things and do the same things, how boring would the world be? It would be like eating mashed potatoes for all your meals forever because everything would just be the same. Body diversity is a beautiful thing. We see variations of bodies in nature all the time. There are no two trees that look the same. There are no two flowers that look the same. What is this weird obsession with having this idealized body shape that doesn't exist? Look at the Kardashians running around setting the beauty norms and standards for the rest of us, and all of them are surgically and digitally enhanced. So they're not even a representation of what just a regular body looks like. We elevate them to the highest beauty standards and we expect everybody else to live up to that.
Well, I don't. And I love that yoga allows us to strip away these layers of what I'll call pretend and connect to what is really honest and truthful through the yamas. Have you seen the show The Good Place?
I haven't. It's on my list.
Oh, I take all these coaching moments from it and I work them into what I do. But there's this scene, I don't want to ruin it, but I'm going to a little bit. But there's a scene where these four humans, they're in the good place. They're appealing to the judge of the universe, the demon who's kind of on their side now, Michael. He says, Your Honor, you don't realize how hard it is to be human and the choices we have to make. And she goes down to try out this human thing. And she comes back and she goes, I get it now. This guy sent flowers to his mom and he got points. But this guy sent flowers to his mom, but he used an online service and he didn't use a local florist and there was shipping involved. And the flowers came from people who were not paid fairly and he lost points because his decisions were not right. So when you go to a store and you pick a tomato, is it a good tomato? Or is it a tomato that had GMOs and is hurting our soil? And the layers of the choices that we have to make sometimes. I'm mostly vegetarian, fish, and occasionally I'll have a bite of meat. But I remember once this woman talking about nutrition. Being human is really hard. All of these choices we have to make. And ultimately you get to the store and you're organic, not organic. Ultimately, at the end of the day, eating an apple is still better for you than eating a bag of potato chips. So just pick the apple. Sometimes we don't have access to make those choices or we don't have income to make those choices. Think of that all woven up into Ahimsa because we cause so much harm we can't always make this perfect choice. It doesn't always exist for us.
It's true. And I would even hazard to say, I don't have any morality around food. So I'm happy if you want to grab the bag of potato chips over the apple, because I'm going to be 100% honest. That's what I'm doing. Apples are great and I'll eat those. I'm an equal opportunity eater, I guess I would say. And honestly, you go to the grocery store and you have a choice between an apple and a bag of chips. But how much money do you actually have? Like, there's lots of people who have food insecurity and not access to healthy, good food. I was once watching a documentary where they took some kids from the inner city in LA out to the suburbs to a grocery store. And there were things that these kids had never seen in a grocery store before. And that blew my mind that there's lots of places in the United States, and I'm sure here in Canada, where you don't have access of food that's good for you, or you don't have the income, because when we choose to eat foods that are high in nutrition, they usually are high in cost as well. The more equitable option for people to get the bag of chips. And I mean, there's a certain amount of nutrition in the bag of chips as well. So I'm not trying to villainize that, but I'm just saying, like you said, it's hard to be a human being. So just make the best choices you can make that make you feel good in your body, and then take that energy and change the world.
As a coach, I love to challenge people to take action and step into being. And along the lines of Ahimsa, maybe if for anyone who's curious or would like to try it, who's listening, I was thinking a great way to tap into Ahimsa would be to check ourselves on access. So when we're creating something or building something or designing something, who has access, who doesn't have access? And how can you create something so that more people have access?
100%. That's brilliant. That's a small check, right? I think we get frozen in inaction, just like that whole Apple scenario. There are just so many things going on. When humans are given too many options and too many things to think about, we will choose nothing. Think about your favorite yoga studio that has a class on the hour every hour, and you think to yourself, great, I'll go at 7. Well, I didn't make it at 7. I'll go at 9. Well, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'll go at noon. Oh, you know what? I'll go after dinner. Oh, well, you know, I'm tired now. You didn't go. You had all those opportunities and you chose inaction. We're kind of like that as humans. We clutch our pearls and we look at the world and we're like, that is horrible.
I never clutched my pearls. I love that expression, though. I'll clutch my lotus flower here.
There you go. Clutch your lotus. And then we choose inaction. So we need to catapult out of that doe in headlights, don't move, don't make too many sounds, maybe nobody will notice us, to what can I do? Like you said, when I'm designing something, what can I do? What can I do? What is within my reach? What is it within my ability to do? And like, just do it. Get out of the comfort zone, get out of your own way, and do the action. In yoga, we call that karma. Action. Do the action.
So much power in all of these interconnected ideas. Dianne Bondy, thank you. Thank you for being here to do this with me. I really love your energy and what you bring to all of us.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun to have these conversations and to think about things in slightly different ways. So I'm always excited to have these conversations with people who want to have them.
I will have these conversations every day. Check out Dianne Bondy at diannebondyyoga.com and be well. And I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you for joining me for Yoga Philosophy for Everyday Living. Please learn more about our guests in the show notes and check out their awesome yoga classes. Subscribe, like, and share this podcast with a friend. And please send me your feedback. I would love to hear from you. You can learn more at sparkpluglabs.co.